Now, I know that there's others that will join us, but I think I'll begin with a brief introduction before I hand over to my colleague, Jean Rail, who's going to offer a seminar this evening on universal design for learning. So you're all very welcome, colleagues and friends, to the MIC Teaching for Inclusion seminar series. As you'll be aware, this is a series that we've been running since late September of this year to engage and share knowledge with our colleagues in the wider teaching community to help with opportunities to support equality, diversity, inclusion, and interculturalism in the classroom. All of these seminars have been recorded and they've been placed up on the Mary Immaculate College Sanctuary website. So for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to attend one of these before, you can actually watch back our previous seminars on the Sanctuary Hub of the MIC website. So as before, you'll be aware we will record this session, and you may prefer to actually turn off your camera, and we would rather you mute also until the very end when we open up the floor for questions and answers with Jean. So Jean is going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation and engage in some discourses around how universal design for learning can be embedded within the classroom. And if you do have questions, please raise your hand, and our colleagues, Trina and Shane, will helpfully allow you to enter into conversation with ourselves. So the seminar this evening is entitled Universal Design for Learning, Designing Flexible, Inclusive Learning Environments for All Learners. And in this seminar this evening, Jean Rail will explore the use of everyday technologies through universal design for learning. And ever before we came online at 7 o'clock, I actually learned a couple of tricks from Jean. So it's fantastic that she's sharing our knowledge with us this evening. Jean is a fantastic colleague, and she's an assistant professor in academic practice based at Mary Immaculate College in Limerick. She has over 25 years of experience in working in technology, enhanced teaching and learning in both the public and the private sector, with a specific focus on creating inclusive learning environments. Jean is currently undertaking her doctorate in the School of Education at Trinity College Dublin, and I believe she's nearing the end of a very informed and applied piece of research that we might actually hear a little bit about, Jean, as we progress through your session as well this evening. Jean provides a wide range of professional development learning opportunities to academics and teachers, both in Mary Immaculate College and across Ireland, and how to embed UDL environments for all learners across all sectors. So, Jean, I'm going to hand over to you and thank you in advance for sharing your wisdom with us this evening. And we look forward to having a question and answer session with you after your presentation.
Great, thanks a million, Lorraine. Okay, hello everybody, and you're very welcome here this evening. As Lorraine said, we will be recording the session, and also a copy of the presentation will be made available to you too. So don't worry about any of the links, they're all going to be made available to you after the presentation today. So as Lorraine said, the whole purpose of tonight really is to look at universal design for learning, but look at how to use technology through that universal design lens. So what we want to do is we want to harness the power of everyday technology to provide as much support as possible for our students and for ourselves. Because when we talk about creating a universal design for learning environment, we also have to think about ourselves, because when we're working with our students and we're building them up and we're giving them all the strategies for engaging with their learning, someday they're going to grow up and become us. So we want to make sure that the environment that we create is one for all. So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to look at the environment that we're currently in. And through COVID, you know, most of us would have used Zoom, or we would have used Teams. But a lot of people weren't aware of the assistive technology that's inbuilt into these systems. So what we want to have a quick look at tonight is how can we orientate ourselves in the current environment that we're in. So the very first thing that we're going to do is, if you go up to the top menu, to the More button with the three dots on it, click the drop down and come down and turn on live captions. Now, when you turn on live captions, you're only turning them on for yourself. So rather than it being in the control of me as the presenter, it's in your control as the participant. So you are completely self-supporting yourself. Now, when you turn it on, and you'll see as I'm speaking that the captions come up across the bottom of the screen, and if I was to engage in a conversation with Lorraine, her voice would come up with her name next to it, and it will switch back and forth between the two of us, so you actually know who's speaking. But also, what's really important to note is that down in the right hand corner where your image is, there's another 3 dots, and if you click that, you can actually change the language. So even though the spoken language tonight is English, you can actually have the captions in whichever language you need to support yourself. So that, again, we're just in Teams, and that inbuilt assistive technology is there, and it's there under the control of the individual. And that's what's really important, and that's what we're going to go through tonight, is this idea of harnessing the power of everyday technology to self-support. One other thing that I will show you as well is that under the slide itself, there's another 3 buttons with more actions. And if you click on those, you'll see firstly that you can put it into high contrast. So if you have somebody who's a visual impairment and they need a high contrast, they can control that themselves. And then also under it, there's another translate option, which will translate the text on the slide into any given language. Okay, so those options are there. You can use them away. You're not going to interfere with anybody else. If you want to try them out as we go through, feel free to play around with them. So when we look at universal design for learning, what are we talking about here? Universal design for learning isn't anything new. I like to describe it as the piece of the inclusive puzzle that brings all of our good practice together. But by mapping it to the framework, we're actually naming it. And by naming it, then we can see if there are any gaps in our current practice, and we can look to create this universal experience for our students. But I always use this quote from Rose and Myers because for me, it speaks to the essence of what UDL is. And they say, by using the UDL framework, educators can accept learner variability as a strength to be leveraged, not a challenge to be overcome. And that's really important. If we look at UDL as anything, we look at it as a mindset. That idea that diversity is the norm. We're all different. We all have different learning preferences. We all have different learning abilities. Our preferences and our abilities change at different times in our educational experience. And it's about knowing how we learn and being able to look at the environment that we're in and get the most out of the environment. So at its essence, what we're looking at here for universal design is we're talking about creating expert learners. Now, expert learners are not A students. Expert learners simply know and understand how they learn and can look at their environment and manipulate their environment to self-support. But how we do that is we create that universally designed environment. So we look at the environment that we're in and we design out as many of the inbuilt barriers that are currently there, because that then allows our students to become purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal directed. We can't make anybody all of these things. We can create the environment, and how we create the environment is by building capacity in our students, by giving them choice, by giving them the opportunity to reflect on their learning, by giving them autonomy, and by creating a collaborative experience that's authentic to them. Because when you connect with your learning environment, that's when you learn best. So that's what we want to do. We want to look at the Universal Design for Learning framework and see how we can apply it to our everyday teaching and learning environments. And I say teaching and learning environments because at the end of the day, you don't UDL for your students, you UDL with your students. You have to have their voice in everything that you do. So we're talking about voice and choice. Katie Novak does a lovely piece on voice and choice. It's where we give our students opportunities, but we listen to their responses and we tailor our environments according to those responses. So the framework itself, at its essence, has 3 key principles: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. So what we do is we look at how do we engage our students. We look at all the traditional ways that we engage our students, and then we look to see, are there new and more interesting ways that we can also adopt. The thing about UDL is it's not replacing what we currently do. And as I said at the start, is this idea of it's bringing all of our inclusive practice together. So what we want to do is we want to build on our inclusive practice. And the way that we can offer our students flexibility really is through technology, and looking at how we can bring technology in to enhance learning, not to replace it, not to make it easier, to actually enhance what we're doing. So we also want to look then at how we're using the technology ourselves. So how are we representing the information to the students? How are we engaging them with it? How are we representing it? How are they accessing things? And then how do they express their understanding? So for instance, if we are harnessing the power of everyday technology and we look at offering multimedia examples in our teaching, then we need to give our students the opportunity to express themselves in those ways as well. Now, sometimes people will say to me, you know, I offered choice to my students around assessment. I gave them options of text, I gave them options of video, I gave them options of audio, and they chose the text version. That is absolutely perfect if they made that choice as a well-informed choice. If they made the choice of text because they didn't know how to use the audio or they didn't know how to use the video, then that's not choice. Choice without capacity isn't choice. So we need to look at building that capacity in our students. And the way we do that is incrementally. We look at how we're engaging them. We look at, is there other ways to do it? We look at the kinds of resources that we're using. We look at how we build those resources. We engage the students in using those resources. We show them exemplars of what good resources look like. And then they start to attach their own understanding and meaning to those resources. So what we want to do is we want to build that capacity in them. The problem that we've had in the past with assistive technology and technology in general in the classroom is that technology was given to the student who couldn't. So if you had a student who couldn't access the curriculum, they were given a resource, they were given an iPad, they were given a laptop. But the problem there is that if we look at the graphic that's on the screen now, this is a graphic you may have seen multiple times before, but if we look at it through the universal design for learning lens, what we want to do is we want to look at how can we change things up. So currently, the middle image is really where we're at as regards giving technology as assistive technology. So if we look at the fence as being our curriculum, and we look at the fields as being our fields of learning, what we want to see is how are we helping our students to access the curriculum and ultimately access their field of learning. The problem that we have is when we put in specialised individual supports to students, we actually limit their ability to engage with the field of learning because we're putting in specific resources just for those students. So that means then that they can only engage with the curriculum through the resources that we were able to give them. Now, we saw through COVID that individualised specialist approach didn't work because it wasn't available to them beyond the classroom. So what we want to do now is we want to look at harnessing everyday technology that bridges that gap between school and home, that bridges that gap between work and college, that gives us that overarching universal approach to giving as much accessibility to information and learning as possible. So if we look at the central image there, that student has some supports put in place, but can still have some autonomy. They can actually get themselves down off that box and move around their learning environment. Whereas the third student has so much support put in place that they only have that one view of their learning environment. So what we want to do is we want to look at the curriculum and say, right, okay, how can we redesign it in a way that designs out as many practical barriers as possible and brings in the technology to allow us to engage better. And if we look at the fence in the third session, you can see that it's actually a much higher, much broader fence, but actually each individual person now has the autonomy to move around and experience their learning in a way that's meaningful to them. So that's setting up the universal design for learning lens, that idea of how can we create an environment that's flexible and that encourages all of our students to engage with it at a level that suits themselves. So what we want to do is we want to look at everyday technology. Now, if I said to you that I have one piece of technology that will support a student who's visually impaired, a student who has difficulty concentrating, a student who's dyslexic, a student who has English as not their first language, a student who has difficulty accessing text-based resources, I'm sure you'd say, give it to me. So I am going to do that now. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to show you this magic piece of software that will do all of those things for you. So I'm just going to and share my screen here now. One second. Okay, can you see that, Lorraine? Is that okay? Perfect. Okay. That magic piece of software is Microsoft Word. Now you're probably thinking, what is she talking about? So what I'm going to say to you is this is an exercise that I would do with some of the students in either the upper part of primary school or the start of secondary school. So the exercise here is you're given a piece of text, you're asked to read that piece of text, and you're asked to continue the story on in your own voice. It just happens to be from the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, this paragraph. So that's the exercise. So for the student who has no identifiable resource needs or additional support needs, we're going to use this piece of technology to support them anyway, and we're going to use it to support all of those other students that I just mentioned. So what we do is we go to the view menu and we come up here to the immersive reader. Now, actually, I just realized I didn't share I'm just going to stop sharing that window for a second because I never turned on the sound when I went to share. And you will need to hear that. Sorry now. Okay, we're back again. You should be able to hear it in a second when it plays. So for a student, as I said, who doesn't have any discernible needs, what you do is when you turn on the immersive reader, you introduce the immersive reader to everybody in the group. You don't single out particular groups that you feel it may support more than others. We introduce this as a universal piece of software that everybody has access to. The first thing that happens when I turn on the immersive reader is, as you can see, if I have a student who is visually impaired, it instantly makes the text bigger. I haven't done anything. Now, the thing here is that what we want to do is we want to use technology that supports the teacher without adding extra work for us. So all I did was put up the original paragraph and the software is going to do the heavy lifting after that. So what happens here is that when I press the play button, it should read loud.
First of all, let me get something straight.
Can you hear that, Lorraine?
Yeah.
Perfect, that's great. So what it does is it's very basic, is it reads the text aloud. So when we're thinking of this as assistive technology, we may not think of that student, as I said, who has no discernible needs. But in actual fact, how many times have we given an assignment to a student, read it ourselves and thought, did they read it at all themselves? So what we do is when we introduce this universally, we say to them, look, this is a tool that will read aloud, use it to hear what you've written, so you can perceive what other people perceive when they read it, so that they start to become more analytical about it. But at the same time, the other student who can't actually physically read it themselves is now using it to read. So both students are using the exact same piece of technology, but they're supporting themselves in different ways. If we've students whose English isn't a first language, suddenly they can see the words, they can hear the words. So if we come up here then and we say, right, okay, let's have a look here at text preferences at the top. Again, if I have a student who's visually impaired, I can increase the size of the text so they see less text on the screen. But also, if I was using this as a teaching support aid to support people in learning to read, I can put less text on the screen for them to see at any one time. Okay, I can increase or decrease the line spacing. I can come down here if I have a student who has dyslexia and they use Irlen lenses and they need to use a colour overlay, they can pick the colour overlay themselves. If they have a visual impairment and they need to invert the colours, they can do that themselves. Remember, we're all just using Microsoft Word, but we're suddenly starting to see, hang on a second, I can use it in this way. And if you introduce it to everybody, very quickly people who need different levels of support will recognise the support that they need themselves, but we're not isolating anybody. Now, again, if you were using this as a teaching aid, instead of having it read everything to you, what you do is you get the student to read whatever they can read themselves, and if they come across a word they don't know, they just click on it. And it says that word.
Something.
So they get that individualized help again. So we're starting to build the capacity. It's not replacing the ability to read, it's supporting the development of reading. So we'll come up here and we'll have a look at the middle icon here, which is the grammar options. Now again, if you're using it as a support for reading, it will break the words down into syllables for you. This will work on anything that's been typed, whether I type it and give it to the students or whether the students type it themselves. Now, again, when we start looking at supporting students who don't, as I said, have identified support needs, again, first thing we asked them to do was hear back what you wrote. Now we're going to say to them, right, I need you to analyse how you wrote that. So what was your verbiage usage? Colour codes the verbs for you. What about your nouns? There's your nouns. But what about the student who doesn't know what a noun is or what a verb is? Suddenly they're colour coded. If they're having other supports that use this parts of speech breakdown, you can change the color coding to match other resources that you have. So if you're using it in a different book and it was green, you can change it to green. So again, you can customize it to suit whatever your needs are. It's turn on, turn off, they're just buttons. So if I turn on a couple of the buttons, then I can also ask it to show me the labels. So it will label over each of the words as well. Again, I know I sound like a broken record. This is just Word. So rather than, as I said, going off buying expensive softwares that they only have access to in school, that go out of date, this is something that we all have. Okay, now the other thing that you want to look at is, I'm aware because this is a public webinar that not all of you might have access to Microsoft Word. So what you want to start doing is you want to start looking at what you have access to. So if you've access to Google, if you've access to Apple, similar resources are available within those as well. So we'll have a look at those specifically later on, but just for the moment, we're going to stick with Microsoft because that's what we use here in the college. So I'm going to turn these off. And I'm going to go to my last one here, which is my reading preferences. So remember I said that if we had a student who had a sensory issue or who needed to see less text on the screen if they were learning to read, we turn it on here and it gives you a focused reader. And as you scroll down the page, the text moves with you. But again, if we were using this incrementally as a teaching aid, you can increase the amount of text that you can see at any one time. So again, you have total control over that. So I'm going to turn this off for a second. And then we have a picture dictionary. Now the pictures aren't fantastic, I have to say, but at the same time, if I looked at, say, book here, it gives me the pictures of books. So you have a little graphic that goes with it. And again, book. So it says the word. Now, for our students who English isn't their first language, again, apart from having all of this support within the package to help them with the English language, we can come down here and we can choose a language. Okay, so we can pick whichever language we want. So just for now, for this, I'm just going to pick French just for the sake of it. I can click on the individual word and it gives me it in English.
Génial.
And in French, and it says it. Okay, we can pick any of the European languages. It covers most languages and it will give the spoken word as well. So if I come down here, I can translate the entire document. And in the same way that I asked you to read in English.
Mardi. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi de mettre les choses au clair.
Okay, so if you have a student who's studying French or German or Spanish in school as well, they can now use Microsoft Word to hear their text read aloud in that particular language. If we're looking at breaking down the barriers between home and school, and we have parents who don't have English as a first language, they can take any document that's been given to their child, any note home from the teacher, they can come into the immersive reader and they can have it translated into their own language. And again, this is just Microsoft Word. And all I did as the teacher was put up a paragraph of text. And suddenly I can use all of these additional features. But what's more is I introduce it to all of the students so that they can self-support and so that those barriers are broken down between you use assistive technology and I don't. Because one of the big problems that we have, particularly in that individualized support mechanism, is that other kids don't see that technology is part of their learning environment because they only see the kid who gets the iPad and they didn't get one. So it isn't part of their actual learning environment in that case. What happens to the child who gets the device then is that sometimes they don't want to use it because they don't want to be different. So this is breaking down all of those barriers, and it's getting us into those 21st century skills that our students need. Because there's this perception that when they come to college, that they're tech savvy. They're not tech savvy. They're social media savvy and they're entertainment savvy, but they're not savvy with technology for learning. And these are the kind of skills that we want to build up. And that goes back to the whole idea of UDL and the expert learner. So we're going to come out of the immersive reader by just hitting the back arrow here. Okay, and we're just going to go back to the home menu. Now, what about the student who can't type? There is the dictate mode up here. Okay, it's out of the box. Sometimes you'll see text to or speech to text options that are recommended for students, but they actually have to train the voice in it. And that in itself can be quite difficult. Whereas here, I just turn on dictate. Okay, it won't dictate because I'm using the microphone for this session, but basically I just hit dictate there and I speak away. I can actually punctuate with my voice as well. So I now start talking when I'm talking about UDL and giving alternatives for action and expression. How do you express yourself? I say, you know, do you write with the keyboard or do you voice write? So our students will have the capacity to voice write. So when we're looking at assessment, then we look at the process and the product. So if I say that I absolutely have to have a text-based output, by allowing them to use Microsoft Word, I'm giving that flexibility of the ability to type it in or the ability to say it and for it to appear on the screen. Another option that's there under dictate as well. And for anybody, this is just a tip for anybody who's doing research, because you see all the researchers sit up and pay attention. If you're doing interviews, if anyone's had to transcribe interviews, you don't do that anymore. You just click on transcribe. It says upload your file, you upload your audio file, and it produces the transcript automatically for you. It's also another way of creating additional resources for your students. So if you have a video or you have audio and you want to give them the transcript of it, you can just drop it in here and it will transcribe it for you automatically as well. Now, one last thing in the magical word is the editor up here. So when I click an editor, it analyzes the text. It'll check the usual, the spelling, the grammar, but then it'll look here at clarity, conciseness, formality, and it will give me a score on them. I can choose whether I wanted to look at it as a professional piece of writing, a formal piece of writing, or a casual piece of writing. And you can see this is a casual piece of writing, so it comes up at 98%. But in actual fact, if I needed it to be a formal piece, it comes back here and tells me, you know, the formality score is 4. If I click on that, it'll highlight the bits and pieces of it that need to be changed. So again, it gives a lot of support there for you. Now, we've used the immersive reader here and we've listed out a whole host of students that it could support. But say, for instance, you've got a student who has, you know, completed this exercise, which we said, read the paragraph, continue on in your own voice. They've come to the end of that. They have it done and they've done way before everybody else. How do we give them additional supports and additional resources? We can send them out to websites that we have pre-selected for them. So for instance, here, I'm going to come out here, just it happens to be this one's the Microsoft Immersive Reader. I could go to the Inclusive National Forum website. They're just 2 random websites that I picked out. If you look up here in the address bar, I'm in Microsoft Edge. There is the read aloud. So it will read aloud the entire content for me. If I come up here and I click on my immersive reader, what it does is it takes all the noise out of the page. So all the ads, all the flashing imagery gives me the text. So I can come along then and I can say to them, right, this is a website that I want you to look at how it was constructed. I want you to look at the language that's in it, have a look at the preferences. Here we go. We have all of the different grammar tools exactly the same as we had when we were in Word. So what we've actually done here is we've introduced the immersive reader through Word, but now we actually can use it in most of the Microsoft products. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to stop sharing the screen and go back to the presentation and show you where we have the rest of those options. I'm just opening up the presentation again for you there. Okay. So if we look here in Microsoft Teams, now you remember at the start of this session I said to you that you could turn on the live captioning for yourself. But now, if you were to put something into the chat, you will notice there's 3 dots next to any message in the chat, and the immersive reader is there, and so is Translate. So what that will do is if there's a message in the chat, which I'll pop something in there for a second, just so that you have something there. Oh, actually, there's some messages there. You can see Lorraine's message. If I hover my mouse over it, I get the emojis, but then I get the more options. And when I click on the more options, then I have the immersive reader and I have Translate. So even if you were using Microsoft Teams to collaborate internationally with teachers from other schools, say you were doing an Erasmus project, you can now just use Microsoft Teams. Type your message in the message box, and the receiver then just clicks on it, translates it into whatever language they want to use. They type in their own language, you do the reverse on the way back. So suddenly, this environment that we're using for one particular purpose is now opened up and supports us in multiple different ways. So when we look at the immersive reader, it's available in Microsoft Teams. It's also available in Microsoft OneNote. So if you want to create an enclosed collaboration space for your students, you can set up a class OneNote, which gives each student an individual notebook, but you have a bird's eye view of it. But there's also a collaboration space. We can bring all sorts of media into that. So we can have our video, we can have our audio, we can have our text, but our immersive reader is inbuilt into it. Okay, we have it in PowerPoint. Now in PowerPoint, you also have PowerPoint Live. So if you want to present your PowerPoint Live, what you do is you just go to present, click on live, and what happens is a QR code comes up on the screen. Student holds their phone up to it. Your slides appear on their phone, along with the translation. So everything that you say then gets translated underneath it into their language of choice. And when you close the presentation, it goes away. It's not recorded, but it's live there, and it gives that additional support. Microsoft Forms is the same. It has the immersive reader inbuilt into it. So has Sway. If you want to look at your emails, you can dictate your emails and you can have your emails read aloud to you. So all there, but you start with Microsoft Word using the immersive reader, and suddenly you have all of this accessibility across the wide range of apps that are available to all Microsoft users. So we have a look here at our next slide. So the immersive reader is available in Word, PowerPoint, Edge, Forms, Teams, OneNote, and Outlook. Dictate is in Word, PowerPoint, Edge, Forms, Teams, OneNote, and Outlook. Translate is in Word, PowerPoint, Edge, Forms, Teams, OneNote, and Outlook. Live captioning is in PowerPoint and Teams, and Live Present is in PowerPoint. So I would say to you, in your own time, have a look at this, play around with it yourself. The resources are on the last slide, so there's lots of video resources that I've linked you to there, so that you can get a little bit more information on it. The other thing as well is that these apps work on your phone, so you're not tied to a device. So if your students don't have laptops or tablets, they will work on their phone as well. So it opens all of that up to us. Another really good app that's available across Android and Apple is the Office Lens. It's a free app. What that will do is you hold your phone over any text, you take a photograph of it, and it will automatically read it aloud for you. Or if you're using Microsoft products, it will bring it into your Word document or into your OneNote document for you automatically as well. Then this is your OneNote notebook, as we said there earlier. Basically what your OneNote notebook does is that you can have it as an individual notebook, or you can have that class notebook. It's great if you want to have multiple teachers on it. So if you have a support team for a student, you can actually have all of the support team in the notebook. They will have access to that individual student's notebook themselves, and they can add resources to it whenever they need to. So it's just a nice central area to share resources for individual students. Now, one of the things that people often say to me is, we have iPads or we don't have iPads. Should we get iPads? What kind of device should we have? The whole idea of assistive technology has really opened up in the last couple of years, because if you had said to me maybe 5 years ago, what's the best tablet to get, I would have said an iPad, simply because the assistive technology is built into the device. So the voice to text is part of the device. The read aloud is part of the device. There's a whole host of other options in the iPad, But now, because we've gone cloud-based, the accessibility is in the Microsoft products. The Microsoft products and the Google products can be accessed by any device. So you don't have to be tied into any specific device. Now, the iPads are a great option, but they're not your only option. And particularly because they're quite expensive too, it can be a little bit prohibitive. And for younger kids as well, they're not as robust as some of the other devices you can have as well. So it's just something to bear in mind, that you don't have to be tied to a device anymore. Now, this is something else that I wanted to just draw your attention to, is HEAD have a fantastic website called AT Hive. Now, I've done a little bit of work with Trevor Boland on this. Trevor's absolutely incredible. He's collated all of this information about all different types of technology. So even though the Microsofts and the Googles are excellent, there will be at different stages additional supports that you want to add in for students. So what this does is, we've put it, there's a 3 question quiz. So you go in and you say, right, what are you interested in? So you'll pick, say, maybe you need help with organising or communicating. So you just click organise and communicate. Then it asks you, what kind of device do you have? So you can pick phone, tablet, whatever. If you don't know what device you have, you just click on tell me what device I'm on, and it'll tell you that. And then the last question it asks you is, do you want it for Microsoft, for Google, or do you not mind? And then it will give you a whole list of options around additional assistive technology. And it will give you videos and all sorts of other information around them, whether they're free, how to access them, what devices they work on. So all of that information is there. It's a great resource for you as a teacher to have. It's a great resource for parents to have. And it's a great resource then for older students to go in and look at what other resources are available to them. So finally, what I'm just going to do there is just show you, these are some resources that I've collated for you. So the first couple of ones are around UDL itself, if you want to find out a little bit more about that, because tonight was a bit of a whistle-stop tour to it. And then there's resources here for the Microsoft products, for the Google products, for Apple. And then the educator sites as well. So there's a very good Microsoft educator site and also a very good Google educator site as well. So if you want to get additional resources there. Some books here as well for UDL. Now, I love this image because nowadays, in the age of technology, what is a book? And one of the things that I always say to people is, you know, if there was a book for this webinar tonight, and you bought the book and I bought the audiobook, does that make you well read and me well listened? Or are we both just well informed? Question is, what's the purpose of the book? What's the purpose of the piece of technology you're using? And if there's flexibility in allowing people to access a book rather than the physical book through an iPad, through an audio collection, through a desktop, then why not make it available to them? So I shall finish talking on that note. I always put up my Twitter handle there simply because there's a fantastic UDL group on Twitter, and they're great for sharing information. So if anybody does want to follow that, feel free to. And that's my own email address as well, if anyone has any questions. So I think what we're going to do now is I'll stop sharing and we'll open up the floor if anybody has any specific questions they'd like to ask.
Jean, that was just fabulous. And I'm using illuminating and inspiring. And I've worked with all of those pieces of software for donkey's years, but I had no idea of the different functionality that you can have within them. So that was just incredibly illuminating, informing for me. So thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem, Lorraine, though, as well, is that, you know, people don't have the time to kind of explore them. So you need the prompts. But the other thing as well is that, you know, because it's so inbuilt into everything we do, and, you know, our students are of that age where technology is everything. And I joke about this, you know, I changed my car in July and I sat in, the old car had no real technology. And I sat in, I was driving along, and next thing she announced, you have a WhatsApp message, would you like me to read it to you? And then she said, do you want to reply to it? And I was just thinking to myself, I could be completely illiterate and be able to receive a text message and send a text message and never actually have to read anything at all. because that's the way the technology is now in the car.
Yeah.
So when we look at all the technology that's out there, we need to look at how we're going to harness that technology and make it work for us instead of fighting against it, you know?
And I guess it's been such a rapid evolution as well over a very short period of time. Jean, I want to ask, have you always been a technological type person, you know, as a child and
Well, to
growing
be
up?
honest, I have a little bit of a backstory in that, in so much as that I'm dyslexic myself.
Yeah.
And I suppose, you know, I was looking for different ways to support myself, and technology just sort of hit at the time when I was coming of age and I saw the potential in it. And so I've always used technology, and I was very much interested from day one in how that technology could be leveraged in learning. So my background has always been in special ed and technology enhancement. So yeah, it's a real passion of mine, because I just think that, you know, if there is a way to do it, then use it, you know.
Yeah, and listen, the passion rings right through, and I've learned so much from you this evening. And I'd like to open it up to the floor. I'm wondering if there are questions from anybody attending this evening. So you can either type into the chat function, or you can raise your hand, and our colleague Shane can let you speak. So Emma is saying there's so many resources available on Microsoft Word, and one we use regularly. Thank you for showing us all those tools. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Emma.
Brilliant, you're more than welcome. And as I said, for anybody who doesn't have access to Microsoft, if you're a Google school, for instance, go and look at the Google resources that are on the last slide there, because there is text to speech. It doesn't have the immersive reader per se, but there are add-ons that you can add in that will give you an awful lot of the same functionality. So it's not an either or. It just so happens in the current design of Microsoft that it has them all in one place, but the other resources or the other softwares have them as well, but just in a different layout.
Jean, I wanted to ask the quality of translating and transcribing. So say translating from English to Ukraine or Afrikaans, can you say anything about the quality of that translation?
It's extremely accurate. It's around it. Now, obviously, it depends sometimes on very distinctive accents, you know, or if people talk very, very fast. But in the general run of things, I mean, for anybody who's turned it on there, you would have seen that it is very, very accurate. I think that they say probably about 96% accurate. And I would have used it quite a lot in the development of courses where we had a lot of pre-recorded material, and I just transcribed it through Word, and it was very, very accurate. And one of the things that it does tend to do as well as it learns, you know, because when you think about it, if you have an Alexa at home, or you use Cortana or any of those, they're all building that continuous database of voices. So the voice mapping is getting better and better and better. One of the things that for the language, sometimes if you only translate the individual word, the tense can be not quite accurate. But if you actually translate the entire piece, then it's much more accurate.
And I actually have, sorry, Jean, I have the live captioning on, and I've been watching it as you've been talking throughout the presentation. And actually the accuracy is incredible in terms of the written word mapped against your verbal presentation. So yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's very good. And actually one of the things that, you know, you did highlight at the start was the project that I'm currently working on for UDL is looking at creating a UDL roadmap, an implementation roadmap for schools. Because what we want to do is we want to build that capacity from primary to secondary to tertiary. So basically what we've been looking at there is, you know, how do we support the students at the different levels? And sometimes in primary school, you know, there's that question about when do we bring the technology in? So what you need to look at is you need to bring it in incrementally. It's not an all or nothing situation, but by the time they get to fifth class, they're basically on par with whatever's going on in first year, really, you know. So we can really start to look at building that capacity there to have that transition into first year. But as we know at the moment with the Ukrainian students that have come in, it's really highlighted the English language barrier. And one of the things that we were looking for a very quick fix, you know, to help these kids to feel supported. And we use the PowerPoint Live in class. So we don't necessarily have to put up a presentation, but if we put up the present live, they automatically then have everything that we're saying in the class translated for them.
Perfect.
And the relief on their face when they realize that I'm not going to be totally lost in this. And then we're using the phones to translate as well for individual conversations and things like that, until we get to that situation whereby, you know, we're able to put in the rest of the supports. Sorry, to see there, somebody's, are there numeracy supports? There are numeracy supports. Now, one of the things that's really useful, and I don't know whether it's primary or secondary that you're looking for, but in particular in OneNote, there is a math solver there. And what it does is that if you put in the equation, it will give you step-by-step solution to that particular equation, and then it will create automatically a 3-question quiz based on it so that you can practice. So that's there as well. And then again, if you have a student who has dyspraxia, they can either use the pen or they can use the keyboard for the maths, and it will convert it over as well. So it's really, really good like that.
Davina is also, well, she's a secondary Google school, but she's asking for recommendations in terms of add-ons for Google.
Yeah, with the thing with that is what you need to do is you need to go to the Google app shop, and basically what you're looking for is, if you Google Immersive Reader, they have an equivalent of that as an add-on that will go on for you. But again, if you're using Google Docs, you have the text to speech in Google Docs as well automatically. So there's quite a few of those. And again, if you look at that resource that's in the last slide, it will give you more up-to-date things. And that's one of the things too that you should really be checking back with all of the softwares every couple of months, because they're updating them constantly. So I might say to you tonight, oh, that isn't there, and you could go next week and it is there. So just to be aware of that, they are changing them quite often.
And Jean, if you are going into the Google store to add an add-on such as the Immersive Reader, is there a charge for that?
No, most of them are free. Most of them are free. Yeah, you just need to just check verify where they're coming from when you do, but the vast majority of them are fine. You know, there's no problem. But again, like that, my first protocol would always be to the Google Educator site first and see what's new there and what's coming out.
Jean, are there networks regionally or, you know, within counties or clusters for schools to engage and learn from each other in terms of UDL?
Most of that would come through the education centres locally. Say like through lockdown, I developed a 3-series webinar on UDL, and I delivered it through most of the, I think I went from Donegal to Cork, and I never left the back room. So yeah, the education centres are mostly the places to go. Now, there is a big push on UDL at the moment as well. So like even last week I was presenting at the principals conference, you know, so there's a lot going on with that at the moment as well. But as I said, with the project that I'm working on now at the moment, the outcome will be this roadmap. It'll be under Creative Commons. Schools will be able to take it and use it. And that's one of the things as well for UDL, is that there's no one size fits all in UDL. You have to look at where you are in the journey. So, you know, what kind of school you are, what resources you've available to you, what your student cohort is, and you design for that particular situation. So really goes back to what we said at the start, that idea of UDL being a mindset. It's where can I build in that flexibility? Where can I develop the students to become that expert learner? You know, so as I said, if you come into this environment and you know suddenly, like say particularly, you know, like you mostly speak obviously to the dyslexic piece, but for me myself, if I know that those assistances are there that I can access myself independently, half the time I don't even have to access them. It's just the fact that I know that it's there. I'm secure in the knowledge that it's there. For instance, if I'm writing something myself, and I mean we write all day every day, but if you come across a word you can't spell, if you don't know how it starts, it stops you in your tracks. Where do you even look it up? Whereas if you can just click on dictate, say the word, and move on,
Yeah,
it's, you know, it's liberating really.
yeah. And you don't lose your train of thought then either.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's, you know, it is very important to realize that this is, and even like people will say to me, you know, God, that read aloud, it's really handy. You know, I had a journal article there and I just put on read aloud and I was doing something else and I was listening to it. It was almost like a podcast. So we need to start looking at what we're calling assistive technology, because at the end of the day, all technology is assistive technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and if we can change that kind of mindset to it, it then becomes part of our environments. And then we can start to see that actually, I don't need to differentiate for my students because the technology will support them where they're at. You know, and it gives them that confidence to engage in the same way, and that those barriers slowly but surely break down. And the world that they're living in, the further they go on, the more access to technology they'll have anyway. So it is a literacy that they need to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just wondering if there are any other questions or comments. Jean, you had two slides, one with website resources and the other with
The reading
focus.
materials. Yep.
Oh, so when I'm going to post up the website address here so people can access this recording and the others, but we might put those links into the embedded text
You can do
to
that as well. Yep.
accompany the video, because I think they would be very helpful for people as well. And I think Bridget has said it really well. She's said a huge thank you to you there, and that you explained everything so well. And she loved your comment, as I did, about being well read, well listened, or informed. And sure, it's all the same thing as long as we have the knowledge. It doesn't matter how how we've acquired it. As long as we're more knowledgeable after the process.
There is a hand up
Breed,
there as well.
yeah, I see Breed's hand up there. Breed, would you like to?
Yes,
Breed.
please. Thank you, Jean. I've actually done a few similar, I suppose, online tutorials with Deirdre Madden of UCC. She's very supportive of third level inclusion and diversity as well. But what I'm focusing on, and the reason I want to upskill as much as possible, is that I'm very conscious as a primary school teacher, if we can equip the parents to support the children then can accelerate more. So
Absolutely.
I am wondering what's your opinion, or what's your I suppose it's your opinion as the expert on how to prepare parents. Should it be something like creating tutorials that should be sent to them, or should it be creating maybe classes for parents where parents can come together? I'm still very conscious that the people you'll be bringing in might not have English as a universal language. So have you any insights into how one could support parents to get on board here so that they can, help the children work alongside them? Well, you know what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jean.
I totally understand what you're asking, Breed. Basically, like what we're trying to do is we're trying to bridge that gap between home and school. And it's the one thing that we hoped COVID would have actually done. And to a degree, it actually did do, because it brought the classroom into the home environment. So what we do need to do here is we need to create that connection. And my preference would be for some sort of face-to-face or online interaction with the parents, so that at the beginning of, say, each term, and particularly at the beginning of, the new school year, that we have webinars for them, or we have face-to-face sessions for them, or that there's some night classes or something that's available in the school, because you're bringing them into that school environment as well. And that what we want to do as well is to show them that how we're using the technology, because again, there's all this sort of thing around, oh, they always had the phone in their hand and then what's they doing with that and blah blah blah, rather than actually saying to them, look, this is a device that will help your child. And also a lot of parents would be looking for advice around, if they're buying devices for their kids, what kind of device should they get? So we need to have a very clear view ourselves in school of what we want the students to actually be able to do, so that we can advise the parents around. Like, for instance, as I said, if we just said, oh, you all have to have an iPad, and that was prohibitive price-wise to some parents, if we actually say, well, we're using, the school account for Google, or we're using the school account for Microsoft, you can access that on any phone. Suddenly, again, we're opening it up to them. and that two-way communication, particularly around the language as well. So if we're sending home electronic notes to the parents and we're showing them how to translate it, we're breaking down that barrier again.
I suppose engagement with the parents around the teaching and learning processes is a highly complex and well debated set of activities, and
It's I think it's that
yeah.
kind of thing though, of that you know, that you feel that you're part of it, that there's that open communication. And the other thing, Bridget, as well there is that, you know, again, having the kids involved in it as well, so that, you know, one of the schools that I was working with did an open night, and what they did was they put QR codes on the desks so the parents could hold their phone over it, and they gave them a little message as they went through the rooms. So started engaging them in it, and then the kids did the guided tours and all of that sort of thing. So there was that kind of communication back and forth that they started to see. Well, in my classroom, you can use your phone for. So when they held up the code, it told them what they were doing, and it just made it more interesting and fun. You know, there's different ways of engaging with it, because again, like, you will have some parents who will be terrified at the thoughts of having to go into the school to be told how to do something. So if there was a section even on the school website that had a lot of these resources, not that you have to create them directly yourself, but you can curate them and put them on there so that they can have access to it. That would be a good starting point. Does that help?
Jean, we've one other question here from Mags, and I'm not sure what platform it relates to, but Mags is asking, she's mentioning that she wasn't able to change the language setting. Would you mind going over that again? I'm just wondering if it's the language in this chat box, because I've tried to change the language in it myself and I wasn't able to do it actually.
Okay. I'd say, Miles, what the problem there is, I just see you've come up as guest on our system. So it's when you're on your own system, you'll see when you go into the chat box that you can actually click the three dots, and then it'll give you the option to change the language. So you can either translate or you can go to immersive reader. It would be the same if you're talking about it on the transcript or the translate at the bottom of the screen. It just depends on how you came into the meeting here. But if you were using it on the, say on the PowerPoint Live, you can automatically pick it from your phone or whatever.
Right. Jean, you've loads of lovely comments there from colleagues who've engaged with you before, saying that great to listen to you, always come away with new information, and thanks so much. And we are actually coming very close to time, Jean. So I don't know if you've any last words of wisdom to give people.
Well, as I say to you, the thing is, look, firstly, play with it yourself until you get comfortable with the software that you have. Introduce it incrementally with your students. Give them the opportunity to play around with it as well, because if you want to know how to use a piece of software, give it to a youngster and they'll tell you how it works very, very quickly. So don't be overwhelmed by the amount of options that are there. Take your time, get to grips with it. As I said, use the resources from Google, from Apple, from Microsoft, and as I said, just keep in touch with it. You have my own details there. If anybody has anything that they want to ask specifically afterwards, feel free to drop me an email. I'd be more than happy to help out. And just keep on going.
Jean, thank you so much, and you're getting lovely comments in the chat box. Yeah, thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Thanks for sharing your expertise. Best of luck with your doctorate journey. I know you're coming to an end, so we'll all be celebrating alongside you when you achieve that. And people saying so insightful, so worthwhile. Thank you so much. So in the coming days, we'll be putting this up online on the Sanctuary Hub of the MIC website, along with the website links and books that Jean has recommended. So Jean, just delighted to have you here this evening for sharing your wisdom and learning from our participants here this evening as well, and wishing you all a lovely evening for the remainder of what is Tuesday night. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million, everybody.